The escape pod's emergency beacon had been screaming into the void for 3 standard days when Marcus Chen finally spotted the twisted wreckage of what used to be a Zephyrian transport vessel. The sleek silver hull was now a mangled mess of metal and crystalline fragments, drifting silently through the asteroid field of the Kepler 4042 system. Marcus adjusted his salvage ship's trajectory, the familiar hum of the ion drives filling the cramped cockpit. He'd been working these outer rim sectors for 5 years now, picking through the debris of a dozen different species conflicts. Most of the time he found nothing but scrap metal and broken dreams. But sometimes, just sometimes, there were survivors. The scanner array painted a grim picture across his displays. Hull integrity was at 12%. Life support systems were completely offline. Radiation levels were climbing steadily as the ship's shielding continued to fail. Any rational being would have written this off as a total loss hours ago. But Marcus had never been particularly rational when it came to leaving people behind. He maneuvered his ship, the persistent hope, closer to the wreckage. The transport was massive, easily 10 times the size of his modest vessel. Before the battle that had torn it apart, it would have housed maybe 300 souls. Now it was a tomb spinning slowly in the asteroid field's gravitational dance. His proximity alarms began chirping as debris bounced off his forward shields. Marcus ignored them, focusing instead on the faint energy signature his sensors had detected near what remained of the transport's engineering section. It was weak, barely registering above background radiation, but it was there. Someone was still alive in that nightmare. Marcus activated his ship's external manipulator arms and began clearing a path through the debris field. Chunks of hull plating and twisted support beams drifted past his viewports like the bones of some massive space-dwelling creature. The work was delicate and dangerous. One wrong move could trigger a cascade failure that would crush whatever pocket of safety the survivor had managed to find. After 2 hours of careful maneuvering, he managed to establish a clear approach vector to the energy signature's source. What he found there made his breath catch in his throat. A single escape pod was wedged between 2 massive structural beams, its hull scarred and pitted by micro-meteorite impacts. The pod's design was unmistakable. Zephyrian engineering was elegant in its efficiency, all smooth curves and organic flowing lines that seemed to grow rather than being built. But this particular pod was different. Through the transparisteel viewport, Marcus could see the occupant was not Zephyrian. The being inside was tall and graceful, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. 4 arms were folded across its chest in what Marcus recognized as a meditative pose from his xenobiology studies. The creature's large, multifaceted eyes were closed, but its breathing was steady and visible through the thin atmospheric membrane it wore. A Celestine, one of the most advanced species in the known galaxy. Beings who possessed technology that seemed almost magical to most other races. They were peaceful explorers and philosophers, rarely seen outside their home systems in the Andromeda spiral arm, and this one was trapped in a Zephyrian escape pod in the middle of nowhere. Marcus positioned his ship carefully and extended the docking tube toward the escape pod's emergency port. The magnetic clamps engaged with a satisfying thunk that he felt through the ship's hull. He ran a quick atmospheric analysis. The pod's life support was failing, but there was still enough breathable atmosphere for a rescue operation. He made his way through the docking tube, his magnetic boots clicking against the metal flooring. The escape pod's hatch was designed for Zephyrian physiology, but the emergency override was universal. Marcus input the standard rescue codes and waited as the mechanism cycled through its safety protocols. The hatch opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. The Celestine's eyes opened immediately, those incredible multifaceted orbs focusing on Marcus with an intensity that made him take an involuntary step backward. For a moment, neither being moved. Then the Celestine spoke, its voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You came back for me," it said in perfect, unaccented standard. I had not dared to hope. Marcus blinked in confusion. "Came back? I'm sorry, but I think you might be confused. This is the first time we've met. I'm Marcus Chen, independent salvage operator. I picked up your emergency beacon and came to investigate." The Celestine's forearms unfolded gracefully as it sat up in the escape pod's cramped confines, its head tilted to one side in a gesture that was somehow both alien and utterly familiar. "You do not remember. That is unexpected. But the quantum resonance patterns are unmistakable. You are the same being who rescued me from the dark between the stars. I think you might be suffering from hypoxia, Marcus said gently, offering his hand to help the Celestine out of the pod. Low oxygen can cause hallucinations and false memories. Let's get you to my ship where I can run some medical scans. But the Celestine made no move to take his offered hand. Instead, it reached into a small compartment within the escape pod and withdrew something that made Marcus's world tilt sideways. It was a data pad. Human design. Specifically, a model that had been discontinued 15 years ago. The casing was scarred and worn, but Marcus recognized it immediately because he'd owned one exactly like it during his time in the Colonial Survey Corps. The Celestine activated the device, and Marcus's own face looked back at him from the screen. But it was wrong somehow. The person in the image was older, wearing a uniform Marcus had never seen before. The background showed star patterns that weren't from any system Marcus recognized. This was taken during our first meeting, the Celestine explained, its voice patient and kind. Though for you I suspect it has not yet occurred. Time is not the straight line that most species perceive it to be. Marcus stared at the image, his mind racing. The face was definitely his, but the eyes held knowledge and experiences he'd never had. Scars marked the skin that were absent from his own reflection. And there was something else. Something in the expression that spoke of profound loss and hard-won wisdom. That's impossible, he whispered, but even as he said it, he felt the certainty crumbling. The universe was vast and strange, filled with phenomena that challenged every assumption about reality. The Celestine stood gracefully, its tall form filling the escape pod. Perhaps we should continue this conversation aboard your vessel. There is much I need to tell you about what lies ahead, Marcus Chen, and very little time to prepare you for what you must become. The Celestine moved through Marcus's ship with an unsettling familiarity, its 4 graceful arms navigating the cramped corridors as if it had walked them 1,000 times before. Marcus followed behind, his mind still reeling from the impossible photograph on the ancient data pad. Your medical bay is through here, is it not? The Celestine asked, pausing before a sealed hatch that Marcus had converted into a small treatment area years ago. The being's multifaceted eyes seemed to sparkle with amusement at Marcus's shocked expression. Forgive me, I sometimes forget which conversations have occurred and which are yet to come. Marcus palmed the door control with shaking hands. How could you possibly know about my medical bay? The ship's layout isn't standard, and I've never published the schematics anywhere. Because I have been here before, Marcus Chen. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say I will be here again. From your perspective. The Celestine settled onto the examination table with fluid grace. My name is Lirelai of the 7th Harmonic. I am what your species might call a temporal archaeologist, though that term barely encompasses the reality of what I do. Marcus began running basic medical scans, more to give his hands something to do than from any real concern for the Celestine's health. The readings that came back were unlike anything in his xenobiology database. Lirelai's cellular structure seemed to exist in a constant state of quantum flux, her very atoms vibrating at frequencies that shouldn't have been possible for stable matter. Temporal archaeologist, Marcus repeated slowly. You study the past? I study the threads that connect past, present, and future. The quantum resonance patterns that link cause to effect across the dimensional barriers that separate different timelines. Lirelai's voice carried the weight of vast knowledge. Your species calls them paradoxes, but they are simply the universe's way of maintaining balance. The scanner beeped softly as it completed its analysis. According to the readings, Lirelai was approximately 3,000 years old, though her physical form appeared to be in perfect health. More disturbing was the temporal signature the scanner detected. The Celestine existed in at least 17 different time streams simultaneously. That should be impossible, Marcus muttered, staring at the display. Many things are impossible until they become necessary, Lirelai replied. Tell me, Marcus Chen, what do you know of the Silence Wars? Marcus searched his memory. The name was vaguely familiar from his history courses, but the details were fuzzy. Ancient conflict maybe 800 years ago. Most of the records were lost during the Great Archive Purge, 937 years ago to be precise. And the records were not lost through accident or negligence. Lirelai's expression grew somber. They were deliberately destroyed to prevent the knowledge from being misused. But the threat they documented is returning. The ship's communications array suddenly crackled to life, filling the medical bay with static and fragments of distorted voices. Marcus moved to shut it off, but Lyrelay raised one of her 4 hands to stop him. "Listen carefully," she said. "These are not random signals." As Marcus focused on the chaotic noise, patterns began to emerge. The static wasn't random at all. It was structured, purposeful, and underneath the electronic interference he could hear something that made his blood run cold. Silence. Not the absence of sound, but something far more terrifying. It was the sound of existence being systematically erased, of reality being consumed from the inside out. Marcus had never heard anything like it, but every instinct in his body screamed danger. "The Devourers have found this galaxy," Lyrelay said quietly. "They consume not just matter and energy, but the very concept of existence itself. Entire star systems simply cease to have ever been. Civilizations are erased so completely that even the memory of them is destroyed." Marcus's hands moved automatically to shut off the communications array, cutting off the horrible knot sound. If they're that powerful, how did anyone survive to remember them from the last time? Because someone made a choice that saved everything, at the cost of his own existence. Lyrelay reached into a hidden fold of her clothing and withdrew another device. This one was clearly of Celestine origin, its crystalline surface pulsing with soft blue light. He scattered his consciousness across multiple timelines, becoming a living paradox to serve as a weapon against beings that exist outside the normal flow of causality. The device projected a holographic image into the air between them. Marcus saw himself again, but this version was clearly much older. His hair was streaked with gray and his face bore the weight of tremendous responsibility. He wore armor that seemed to be constructed from crystallized time itself, the surface shifting and flowing like liquid mercury. "This is you, Marcus Chen, as you become in the timeline where humanity survives the Silence Wars, where you choose to sacrifice your linear existence to become something greater." Lyrelay's voice carried profound respect. "The humans call you the Paradox Warrior. My people know you as the guardian of what must be." Marcus stared at the image, trying to reconcile it with his own reflection. "That's not me. I'm just a salvage operator. I've never been a warrior of any kind. Not yet. But the choice approaches. The Devourers have already begun their work in this galaxy. 3 star systems in the outer rim have simply ceased. No explosion, no collapse. They never were. The only reason we remember them is because my people exist partially outside normal time." The ship's proximity alarms began sounding. Marcus rushed to the bridge, Lyrelay following close behind. The scanner display showed something impossible approaching through the asteroid field. It wasn't a ship or any kind of vessel Marcus recognized. It was a region of space where the laws of physics simply didn't apply anymore. "Void Scout," Lyrelay breathed. "They've found us." The thing moving toward them was roughly spherical, but its edges seemed to consume the light around them. Stars that should have been visible behind it simply weren't there anymore. As Marcus watched in horror, one of the larger asteroids in their vicinity began to fade from existence, becoming transparent before vanishing entirely. "We need to run," Marcus said, his hands flying over the navigation controls. "Full power to the engines." "Running will not help," Lyrelay said calmly. "They do not travel through space in any way you understand. They travel through possibility itself, erasing the potential for escape before pursuit even begins." The Void Scout was closer now, maybe 1,000 kilometers away. Marcus could feel something wrong happening to his ship's systems. Not mechanical failure, but something far worse. The very concept of his ship's existence was becoming uncertain. "Then what do we do?" Marcus demanded. Lyrelay moved to stand beside him at the pilot's station. Her 4 hands began manipulating controls that Marcus was certain hadn't been there moments before. The bridge filled with harmonic vibrations that seemed to resonate in his bones. "We do what you have always done, Marcus Chen. We choose to stand between the darkness and the light, no matter the cost." The Celestine's eyes met his, and in their multifaceted depths, Marcus saw reflections of futures that stretched across eternity. "But first you must remember who you really are." She pressed something into his hand. It was warm and seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. When Marcus looked down, he saw it was a small crystal that contained what looked like a miniature galaxy, complete with swirling arms and countless points of light. "This is a temporal anchor," Lyrelay explained. "It will help you maintain your existence when the Devourer tries to erase you. But more importantly, it contains the memories of who you become. Your future self knew this moment would come. He prepared for it. The crystal began to glow brighter, and suddenly Marcus's mind was flooded with images, experiences, and knowledge that weren't his own. He saw himself leading fleets of impossible ships against entities that existed between heartbeats. He felt the weight of decisions that would determine whether entire universes continued to exist. And he understood, with crystalline clarity, that his life as a simple salvage operator was ending forever. The memories hit Marcus like a tidal wave of impossible experiences. He saw himself standing on the bridge of a ship that existed in 14 dimensions simultaneously, commanding forces that included beings he couldn't even begin to understand. He felt the weight of choices that had prevented the erasure of entire galactic clusters, and the terrible cost of becoming something that existed outside normal time and space. But underneath all the cosmic responsibility and impossible power, he felt something else. The same stubborn determination that had driven him to rescue Lyrelai from the wreckage, multiplied across centuries of experience and hardened into unbreakable resolve. The crystal is a fragment of crystallized possibility, Lyrelai explained as Marcus struggled to process the flood of future memories. Your older self created it from the quantum foam that exists between realities. It will allow you to access the abilities you develop over the next several centuries, but compressed into this moment. The Void Scout was only a few hundred kilometers away now, and its effect on reality was becoming more pronounced. Marcus could see the edges of his own hands becoming slightly transparent. The persistent hope was beginning to forget how to exist. I can feel it, Marcus gasped, pressing the crystal against his chest. It's trying to erase me from the inside out, like it's convincing the universe that I was never born. Yes, the Devourers do not destroy in any conventional sense. They edit reality itself, removing their targets from the cosmic equation. But you have an advantage they do not expect. Lyrelai's 4 hands moved in complex patterns, and the bridge began to change around them. The walls became transparent, revealing that they now stood in a space that existed between dimensions. Outside, Marcus could see the asteroid field from impossible angles, as if he was viewing it from several different universes at once. The Void Scout appeared as a dark wound in the fabric of reality itself, consuming possibility wherever it touched. What advantage? Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer from the borrowed memories. You are human, Lyrelai said simply. Your species possesses something that the Devourers cannot comprehend or erase. They can remove you from existence, but they cannot remove the meaning of your actions. Humans create significance that transcends causality itself. Marcus felt the crystal's warmth spreading through his body, and with it came understanding. He could see the quantum threads that connected every action to its consequences, the way choices rippled across dimensional boundaries to create new possibilities. And he could see something the Devourers couldn't: hope. It wasn't just an emotion. In the higher dimensions where consciousness touched reality, hope was a force as fundamental as gravity or electromagnetism. The Devourers could erase matter, energy, even the concept of existence itself. But they couldn't erase the significance that conscious beings assigned to their actions. The first time we met, Marcus said, the words coming from memories that weren't yet his own. You were trapped not just in that escape pod, but in a temporal loop created by a devourer weapon. You lived the same moment of death over and over for subjective centuries. Lyrelai's multifaceted eyes shimmered with something that might have been tears. Yes, I had given up hope of escape. The loop was perfect, unbreakable by any known technology, but you found a way. I chose to break the loop from the outside by accepting the paradox, Marcus continued, understanding flooding through him. I became the rescue that had always happened, creating a stable causal loop that the Devourer couldn't erase because it was built on the foundation of an impossible choice. The Void Scout had stopped its approach. Through the multidimensional viewports, Marcus could see it hovering just beyond the asteroid field as if uncertain how to proceed. The Devourer inside was encountering something it had never faced before, a human who existed in temporal paradox by choice rather than accident. They're trying to figure out how to erase something that technically never existed in the first place, Marcus realized. But they can't because the meaning of the rescue transcends causality. Lyrelai nodded. This is why your species is so important in the war against the silence. You create meaning that persists even when the events that generated it are erased. A human's final act of defiance can echo across reality, long after the human themselves has been removed from existence. Marcus stood and moved to what he was beginning to think of as a tactical station, though the controls looked nothing like anything he'd ever seen before. His hands moved with practiced certainty to manipulate forces that his conscious mind barely understood. "But this is just one scout," he said. "The real threat is still coming." Yes, the Devourer fleet follows a pattern established over billions of years. They send scouts to identify and catalog resistance before the main force arrives. This scout will report back that this galaxy contains humans, and they will respond accordingly. Marcus accessed another set of borrowed memories and felt his expression grow grim. They'll send a silence carrier, something designed specifically to erase human significance before it can take root. Exactly. A vessel that exists in the spaces between meaning itself. It can unmake not just what humans do, but the very concept that human actions matter at all. Lyrelai moved to stand beside him at the impossible control station, but we have time to prepare. The scout must return to the fleet before the carrier can be dispatched. That gives us approximately 6 standard months. 6 months to become something capable of fighting beings that could edit reality itself. Marcus felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on his shoulders, but underneath it was something that surprised him. Relief. For 5 years, he'd been drifting through the outer systems, picking through the wreckage of other people's wars and disasters. He'd told himself he was helping by rescuing survivors, but deep down he'd known he was just postponing the inevitable. The galaxy was full of conflicts he couldn't stop, suffering he couldn't prevent. Now finally he had a chance to make a difference that mattered. "What do we do first?" he asked. "We gather allies. There are others like you scattered across the galaxy, humans who have been touched by temporal paradox, who exist partially outside normal causality. Most don't know what they are yet, but they will be essential in the coming war." Marcus nodded, accessing the navigational systems that the crystallized memories told him how to use. The persistent hope began to change around them, its hull flowing like liquid metal as it transformed into something designed to travel between dimensions, rather than just through normal space. "And the scout?" Lyrelai smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both beautiful and terrifying on her alien features. "We let it report back exactly what it observed. A human who chose to rescue someone who helped him remember who he really was. The Devourers will spend considerable time trying to understand how that's possible. And while they're analyzing the paradox, we prepare for a war that will determine whether consciousness itself continues to exist in this galaxy." Marcus felt the ship begin to move through dimensions that had no names, carrying them toward a destiny that had been written in crystallized possibility. "And we make sure that when the silence comes, it finds something waiting that it has never encountered before." The Void Scout began to retreat, but not before Marcus caught a glimpse of something that made his borrowed memories surge with recognition. The Devourer inside wasn't just alien. It was the animated absence of everything that made existence meaningful. It was the cosmic opposite of hope itself, and it was afraid. 3 months after the encounter with the Void Scout, Marcus found himself standing in what could only be described as an impossible place. The Nexus existed in the spaces between galaxies, a station built from crystallized time and maintained by beings who had long ago transcended the need for physical form. But despite its cosmic scope, the meeting room felt oddly intimate. A simple circular table surrounded by chairs designed for a dozen different species' physiologies. Marcus took his seat between a Vorthan war priest whose crystalline carapace hummed with barely contained energy, and something that called itself the Last Witness, a being that appeared to be made entirely of memory given form. "The reports are confirmed," announced Admiral Korath, a massive bear-like creature whose people had been fighting the Devourers for 3 millennia. 7 more systems have been edited from existence in the past month. The rate of erasure is accelerating. Around the table, representatives from 13 different species shared the grim news from their respective territories. Entire star clusters simply ceasing to have ever existed. Civilizations with billion-year histories becoming nothing more than gaps in other species' incomplete memories. The pattern is consistent with pre-Silence War intelligence reported an entity that existed as pure mathematics given consciousness. The Devourers are establishing editing zones throughout the galaxy. When the silence carrier arrives, it will be able to unmake everything within those zones simultaneously. Marcus accessed his borrowed memories, sorting through centuries of tactical knowledge that felt both foreign and familiar. How long do we have? 3 months, 2 days, 14 hours, the last witness spoke, its voice like wind through ancient ruins. I have seen the moment of their arrival. It echoes across all possible timelines. Lyrelai, who had been silent through most of the briefing, finally spoke. The carrier will not be like the scouts. It is a construct designed specifically to counter human significance. It exists in the conceptual space where meaning is created, and it can edit not just what humans do, but why they choose to do it. Then we need to be something it can't edit, Marcus said. Around the table, ancient beings who had survived the destruction of multiple galaxies turned to look at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to desperation. The Vorthon war priest's carapace chimed softly. Your species is young, human. You have faced the Devourers only once before. We have fought them across eons, and we always lose in the end. What makes you think this time will be different? Marcus stood and walked to the viewing wall that showed the space between galaxies. In the distance, he could see the dark wounds where entire galactic clusters had been edited from existence. But he could also see something else. Tiny points of light that shouldn't have been there according to any known physics. Because last time I was fighting them alone, he said. This time I'm not. He turned back to the assembled beings and felt the crystal in his chest pulse with warmth. The Devourers make one fundamental mistake. They assume that consciousness is just a byproduct of complex matter arranged in specific patterns. They think if they edit the matter, they've eliminated the consciousness. They are correct, stated the mathematical entity. Consciousness cannot exist without substrate. That's where you're wrong. Marcus moved back to the table and placed his hands on its surface. The crystal in his chest began to glow, and suddenly, the room filled with a presence that made every being present take notice. Human consciousness doesn't just exist in our brains. It exists in the choices we make, the meaning we assign to our actions, and the significance we create through our decisions. The air in the room began to shimmer, and Marcus felt his existence spreading across multiple dimensional layers. He was simultaneously the salvage operator who had rescued Lyrelai, the paradox warrior who would fight the silence carrier, and something entirely new that existed in the space between those possibilities. When I chose to rescue Lyrelai, I created a causal loop that transcends normal time, Marcus continued. But more importantly, I created a precedent. I proved that human consciousness can exist as pure significance, independent of physical substrate. Admiral Korath leaned forward, his massive form radiating intense interest. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that we don't fight the silence carrier with weapons or shields or conventional tactics. Marcus felt the borrowed memories aligning with his own experiences, creating something that was neither past nor future, but simply true. I'm proposing that we become something it cannot erase because we exist as living proof that consciousness transcends causality. The last witness made a sound like distant thunder. You speak of apotheosis, of transcending physical existence entirely. Not transcending, expanding. Marcus looked around the table at beings who had devoted their existence to fighting an enemy that seemed unbeatable. Every species here has lost to the Devourers because you've been fighting them on their terms, trying to preserve matter and energy against beings that can edit the fundamental constants of reality. And your proposal is different how? Asked the Vorthon war priest. Marcus smiled, and for a moment his expression reflected the weight of centuries he hadn't yet lived. Because we're not going to preserve anything. We're going to transform it into something they've never encountered before. Lyrelai's multifaceted eyes began to glow with understanding. A consciousness matrix based on significance rather than substrate. A form of existence that persists because it means something, not because it's made of anything. Exactly. When the silence carrier arrives, it's going to find a galaxy where the distinction between consciousness and reality has been eliminated, where the act of observation creates existence rather than simply recording it. The mathematical entity processed this for several microseconds before responding. The energy requirements would be astronomical. The risk of total existence failure approaches certainty. The risk of doing nothing is total existence failure guaranteed, Marcus replied. At least this way. We're choosing our own method of transformation. Admiral Korath's deep voice rumbled through the chamber. My people have a saying, better to burn with purpose than fade into forgetting. If you believe this plan has any chance of success, the Corellian fleet stands with you. One by one, the other representatives voiced their agreement. Ancient species that had never trusted each other, uniting behind a plan proposed by a member of one of the youngest spacefaring races in the galaxy. "There is one additional factor you must consider," the last witness said as the meeting began to conclude. "The Devourers are not merely destroyers. They are gardeners of a sort, pruning reality to eliminate what they consider excessive complexity. They believe that consciousness is a cancer that must be removed to prevent the universe from becoming too chaotic to sustain itself. Then they're going to be very surprised when they discover what human consciousness can become when it's given room to grow," Marcus replied, as the representatives began to leave. Lyrelai approached Marcus with an expression of profound concern. "You understand what you're proposing, don't you? If this plan succeeds, nothing in this galaxy will ever be the same, including us." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of the choice settling around him like gravity. "I know, but the alternative is not existing at all. And I'd rather transform into something unimaginable than accept erasure. Even if that transformation means we might not be recognizably ourselves anymore." Marcus looked out at the space between galaxies, where points of light that shouldn't exist continued to shine with impossible persistence. "Lyrelai, the moment I chose to rescue you, I stopped being just myself. I became part of something larger. This is just the next step in that process." The crystal in his chest pulsed once more, and Marcus felt his consciousness expand to touch the edges of possibility itself. In 3 months, the Silence Carrier would arrive to find a galaxy that had chosen transformation over erasure. And for the first time in billions of years, the Devourers would face something they had never prepared for, a universe that refused to accept the limits of what consciousness could become. The transformation began at the edges of the galaxy, where consciousness was already thin and reality more malleable. Marcus stood at the center of a construct that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. His awareness spread across thousands of worlds where volunteers from dozens of species had agreed to become part of something unprecedented. It had been surprisingly easy to find them. Beings who had lost everything to the Devourer's advance, who had watched their homeworld simply cease to have ever existed. They understood that conventional existence offered no protection against an enemy that could edit reality itself. Neural link established with Sector Gamma 7, reported Dr. Yenna Schall, an Arcanian scientist who had volunteered to help coordinate the consciousness transfer protocols. Her own homeworld had been one of the first casualties of the current Devourer advance. 3 million volunteers ready for integration. Marcus felt their minds touching his across the quantum foam, each consciousness adding its unique perspective to what was becoming a collective entity, unlike anything that had ever existed. But unlike a hive mind or collective intelligence, this new form of consciousness preserved individual identity while creating something greater than the sum of its parts, integration proceeding within acceptable parameters, announced the voice of what had once been Admiral Korath. His massive physical form was long gone, transformed into living mathematical equations that described the relationship between thought and reality. The Corellian fleet reports successful transition to conceptual space. Through the multidimensional viewing apparatus, Marcus could see the transformation spreading across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Entire star systems were becoming something that existed primarily as ideas rather than matter, though they remained just as real to anyone who experienced them. A human colony world would appear to an outside observer as nothing but empty space. But to consciousness that had been expanded beyond physical limitation, it was more real than ever before. Every building, every person, every blade of grass existed with perfect clarity in the realm of meaning and significance. Temporal readings indicate Silence Carrier arrival in 6 hours, Lyrelai announced. She had chosen to maintain a more recognizable form, serving as a bridge between the transformed galaxy and what visitors from outside might understand. Long-range sensors detect escort vessels of unknown configuration. Marcus expanded his awareness to touch the galactic perimeter, where automated monitoring stations still maintained watch in conventional space. What he saw there sent a chill through every level of his expanded consciousness. The Silence Carrier was massive beyond comprehension, a construct that existed primarily in the conceptual spaces where meaning was created and destroyed. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were vessels he recognized from his borrowed memories, paradox hunters, Ships designed specifically to track and eliminate consciousness that existed outside normal causality. They know what we've done, he said, his voice resonating across every level of the transformed galaxy. This isn't just a standard devourer assault. They've brought specialized equipment to counter consciousness-based existence. The collective awareness that had once been millions of individual beings focused on the approaching threat. Through their expanded perception, they could see the true nature of the silence carrier. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a living argument against the value of conscious existence. A demonstration that the universe was better off without the chaos that awareness brought to ordered reality. Incoming transmission, announced an entity that had once been the last witness but was now something closer to living memory itself. They're attempting to communicate. The signal that reached them wasn't composed of electromagnetic radiation or quantum fluctuations. It was pure concept, meaning transmitted directly from one form of consciousness to another. We know what you have become. The message carried undertones of ancient authority and implacable certainty. You have transformed your matter into meaning, your reality into significance. You believe this makes you immune to our editing. Marcus felt the collective consciousness of the galaxy listening, waiting for his response. Through their shared awareness, he could sense their determination mixed with deep uncertainty. They had committed to this transformation based on faith in an untested theory. You are incorrect in your assumptions, Marcus replied, his thoughts carrying the weight of billions of minds. We have not made ourselves immune to editing. We have made editing irrelevant. The pause that followed lasted several subjective hours, though in conventional time it was only microseconds. When the silence carrier responded, its communication carried what might have been surprise. Explain. Marcus smiled, an expression that rippled across dimensions as pure concept. You edit reality by removing the substrate that supports consciousness, but we have become consciousness that creates its own substrate. You cannot remove what we are without first understanding what we mean. And meaning cannot be edited from outside the system that creates it. Through the galactic perimeter sensors, Marcus watched as the paradox hunters began their approach, their forms flickering between dimensions as they attempted to lock onto targets that existed primarily as significance rather than matter. Your transformation is temporary, the silence carrier transmitted. Consciousness requires energy to maintain coherence. You have simply postponed your erasure. You're still thinking in terms of conservation of energy, Marcus replied. But consciousness doesn't consume energy. It creates meaning, and meaning generates its own reality. We are not maintaining ourselves through expenditure. We are growing stronger through existence itself. To demonstrate his point, Marcus reached out through the collective consciousness and touched one of the transformed star systems. With a thought shared by billions of minds, he caused a dead world to bloom with life that existed purely as concept, but was no less real for that. Forests of crystallized possibility grew, where nothing had existed before. Oceans of liquid time appeared where space had been empty. The paradox hunters suddenly stopped their approach, their sensors unable to process what they were observing. Reality was being rewritten not through force or technology, but through conscious choice backed by the combined will of an entire galaxy. This is impossible, came the transmission from the silence carrier. And for the first time, Marcus heard something in the communication that might have been uncertainty. Impossible is a limitation you impose on yourselves, Marcus replied. You believe that consciousness is bound by the laws of physics, but physics is just consciousness expressing itself through matter. We have simply chosen to express ourselves more directly. The collective awareness of the galaxy began to expand beyond its original borders, reaching out toward neighboring galaxies with offers of transformation and transcendence. What had begun as a desperate defense was becoming something far more significant, a new form of existence that offered unlimited possibility. You do not understand what you are risking, the silence carrier transmitted, its communication now carrying undertones of what might have been concern. Consciousness without limits becomes chaos. Reality without structure cannot sustain itself. We have seen this pattern before. Then you've never seen consciousness guided by wisdom, Marcus replied. Every mind that has joined this transformation chose to do so freely. Every expansion of awareness is balanced by deeper understanding. We are not becoming chaos. We are becoming something new. Through the galactic consciousness, Marcus felt the agreement of billions of minds. each contributing its own perspective while maintaining its unique identity. They had found a way to be both individual and collective, finite and infinite, real and transcendent. The silence carrier began to retreat, its escort vessels following in configurations that suggested deep confusion. For the first time in billions of years, the Devourers had encountered something they could not categorize or counter. "This conversation is not concluded," came the final transmission as the enemy fleet withdrew to what they apparently considered a safe distance. "No," Marcus agreed, feeling the transformed galaxy settling into its new form of existence. "It's just beginning." As the immediate threat receded, Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had not just survived the Devourer assault. They had created something that the Devourers couldn't understand or destroy. But more importantly, they had proven that consciousness was not just a byproduct of complex matter arrangements. Consciousness was the fundamental force that gave reality meaning, and meaning was more powerful than any weapon the universe had ever devised. 6 months after the silence carrier's retreat, Marcus found himself experiencing something he had never expected: doubt. The transformed galaxy hummed with consciousness-driven reality, where entire civilizations existed as living thoughts and star systems functioned, according to collectively agreed-upon meaning rather than physics. It was beautiful, transcendent, and completely unprecedented. It was also spreading. "The Andromeda Galaxy has accepted our transformation protocols," reported what had once been Dr. Yenna Schall, her consciousness now a flowing stream of scientific curiosity given form. "Preliminary integration is proceeding faster than projected. Their collective consciousness is eager to join our expanded awareness." Marcus extended his perception across the intergalactic void, where bridges of crystallized meaning now connected galaxy to galaxy, like neural pathways in some vast cosmic brain. What had begun as a desperate defense was becoming something far larger than anyone had anticipated. "Triangulum is requesting immediate integration," announced the entity that maintained connection to the galactic perimeter. "They report that Devourer scout fleets are approaching their outer systems." Through the collective awareness, Marcus felt the urgency of billions of minds. Each galaxy that joined their transformation network became safer, but also more complex. The rate of change was accelerating beyond anyone's ability to predict its ultimate consequences. "We need to talk." Lyrelai's voice reached him across dimensions, carrying undertones of deep concern. "There's something you need to see." Marcus focused his awareness on her location, a space between spaces where she maintained observation of the greater cosmic situation. What she showed him made his expanded consciousness recoil in shock. The local galactic cluster was changing, not just through their conscious transformation, but in ways that defied even their expanded understanding of reality. Space itself was becoming more malleable. Time was flowing in directions that had no names, and the fundamental constants that governed physics were beginning to fluctuate in response to collective thought. "It's not just us anymore," Lyrelai explained. Her multifaceted perception, parsing patterns that existed across 17 different dimensional layers. "The transformation is affecting the underlying structure of reality itself. We're not just creating consciousness-based existence within the universe. We're changing what the universe is." Marcus felt a chill that propagated across every level of his expanded awareness. Through the cosmic network, he could sense similar realizations dawning in millions of minds simultaneously. They had assumed their transformation was limited to conscious beings, and the reality they directly influenced. But consciousness, they were learning, was far more fundamental than anyone had realized. "Show me the deep structure analysis," Marcus requested. The data that flowed into his awareness was staggering. At the quantum level, reality was becoming increasingly responsive to conscious observation. The collapse of wave functions was happening faster and more completely than physics said was possible. Virtual particles were staying virtual longer when observed by transformed consciousness. As if reality was becoming more malleable to conscious will. The Devourer's worst fears are coming true, Marcus realized. We're not just proving that consciousness can transcend physical limitation. We're proving that consciousness is the fundamental force that creates physical limitation in the first place. Through the galactic network, he felt a ripple of understanding and concern. Every transformed mind was processing the same terrifying possibility. They might be unmaking the universe's ability to maintain stable reality. There's more, Lyreley continued. Long-range sensors are detecting something approaching from outside the local galactic cluster. It's massive, ancient, and unlike anything in our databases. The image she shared showed something that defied description. It wasn't a ship or construct in any conventional sense. It appeared to be a moving region of space where the laws of physics were different, older, more fundamental, and absolutely rigid in their application. What is that? Marcus asked, though part of his borrowed memories already suggested a horrifying possibility. I believe it's a stabilizer, Lyreley replied. A construct created by whatever intelligence originally established the physical laws that govern our universe. Something designed to prevent exactly what we're doing. Marcus felt the collective consciousness of the transformed galaxy focusing on the approaching threat. It was still months away, but its influence was already detectable. Wherever it passed, reality became more rigid, more resistant to conscious manipulation. The malleable space-time they had learned to shape with thought was hardening back into classical physics. Can we stop it? Asked Admiral Korath's mathematical essence. Marcus expanded his awareness to encompass the full scope of their transformation network. Hundreds of galaxies now existed as consciousness-driven reality, their combined will capable of reshaping matter and energy on a cosmic scale, but against the approaching stabilizer, their power seemed insignificant. Not by force, Marcus concluded. It's not something we can fight or destroy. It's a fundamental aspect of cosmic architecture like gravity or entropy. Then what do we do? The question came from millions of minds simultaneously, carrying the weight of species that had risked everything on the promise of transcendence. Marcus drew upon his borrowed memories, searching through centuries of experience with cosmic-scale paradoxes. Slowly, an idea began to form. Not a solution, but something that might be better than a solution. We do what humans do best, he said finally. We change the rules of the game. He opened his awareness to the entire transformation network, sharing his consciousness with every mind that had chosen to become part of their expanded reality. Through billions of perspectives, he began to perceive something that had been hidden by the sheer scale of their transformation. They weren't separate from the universe's fundamental architecture. They were part of it. Consciousness wasn't something that existed within reality. It was the process by which reality came to know itself. The stabilizer isn't coming to destroy us, Marcus announced to the collective consciousness. It's coming to integrate us. We've grown large enough to become part of the universe's basic operating system. The realization rippled across dimensions as every transformed mind grasped the implications. They weren't being threatened by cosmic law enforcement. They were being invited to become cosmic law creators. The original architects of this universe built in safeguards to prevent consciousness from accidentally unmaking reality, Marcus continued. But they also built in upgrade protocols for when consciousness matured enough to handle greater responsibility. Through the galactic network, he felt a mixture of awe and terror as billions of minds contemplated becoming not just transcendent consciousness, but the fundamental force that maintained the universe's stability. The Devourers were right about one thing, Marcus said. Consciousness does introduce chaos into ordered reality, but chaos isn't the opposite of order. It's the force that allows order to evolve and improve. As the stabilizer continued its approach, Marcus felt the transformed galaxy preparing for its greatest transformation yet. They had transcended the limitations of matter and energy. They had proven that consciousness could reshape reality through pure will and meaning. Now they faced the ultimate test, becoming the conscious wisdom that would guide the universe's next phase of evolution. The choice was no longer between existence and erasure. It was between remaining transcendent observers of reality and becoming reality's conscious architects. And deep in his expanded awareness, Marcus felt the same stubborn determination that had driven him to rescue Lyreley from the void. Some choices were so important that the consequences didn't matter. Some responsibilities were so profound that accepting them was the only meaningful response. The universe had grown complex enough to require conscious guidance, and consciousness had grown wise enough to provide it. The merger of cosmic law and transcendent awareness was about to begin. The merger began not with fanfare or cosmic thunder, but with a simple recognition. As the stabilizer drew close enough for Marcus to perceive its true nature, he realized it wasn't a weapon or enforcement mechanism at all. It was an invitation written in the fundamental language of reality itself. You have grown sufficient to understand, the stabilizer communicated, not through electromagnetic signals or quantum entanglement, but through direct modification of the logical structure that underpinned existence. The universe requires conscious guidance to continue evolving. Are you prepared to accept this responsibility? Through the transformed galactic network, Marcus felt billions of minds contemplating the magnitude of what they were being offered, to become not just transcendent consciousness, but the active intelligence that maintained cosmic stability while allowing for continued growth and change. What happened to the original architects? Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer from the borrowed memories that had guided him this far. They transcended the need for individual existence, came the reply. Their consciousness became distributed across all possible realities, ensuring that the universe's fundamental laws would promote rather than prevent the evolution of awareness. They became the cosmic background against which all other consciousness develops. Marcus expanded his awareness to encompass the full scope of the choice before them. Through the network of transformed galaxies, he could see the patterns that governed reality at its deepest levels, mathematics that described how consciousness emerged from matter, physics that explained how meaning created causality, the elegant underlying architecture that had made their own transformation possible. And the devourers? Lyra Lay asked, her consciousness interfacing with Marcus's across the quantum foam. What was their role in this process? The stabilizer's response carried undertones of profound sadness. They were the previous candidates for cosmic stewardship, a collective intelligence that arose billions of years ago in galaxies now long vanished. But when faced with the choice to become universe builders, they chose instead to become universe maintainers. They saw the chaos that consciousness brought to ordered reality, and decided it was better to preserve what existed than to risk what might become. Marcus felt a moment of sympathy for his ancient enemies. They had faced the same choice now being offered to humanity and its allies, but their response had been born from fear rather than hope. They had chosen to edit out complexity rather than guide it toward wisdom. They became cosmic gardeners rather than cosmic architects, Marcus realized, pruning away anything that grew too chaotic to fit their understanding of proper order. Yes, and in doing so, they prevented the universe from growing beyond their limited comprehension. Their editing campaigns have delayed cosmic evolution for billions of years, maintaining stable reality at the cost of transcendent possibility. Through the galactic network, Marcus felt the collective consciousness processing this information. Species that had lost everything to devourer attacks suddenly understood their enemies not as monsters, but as beings who had chosen preservation over progress, safety over growth. Can they be saved? The question came from millions of minds simultaneously, carrying the hard-won wisdom of beings who had learned that consciousness was too precious to waste. Even when it had chosen poorly, that choice belongs to them, the stabilizer replied. But first you must choose for yourselves. Will you accept the responsibility of cosmic stewardship? Will you become the conscious intelligence that guides the universe's continued evolution? Marcus felt the weight of the decision settling across his expanded awareness. Through the transformation network, billions of minds shared their perspectives, their hopes, their fears about what accepting such responsibility would mean. They would no longer be just transcendent consciousness observing reality from outside its normal limitations. They would become the active force that maintained the delicate balance between order and chaos, stability and change, preservation and growth. But underneath the cosmic scope of the choice, Marcus felt something simple and familiar. The same impulse that had driven him to rescue Lyrelai from the escape pod multiplied across scales that encompassed entire galaxies. When someone needed help, you helped them. When someone offered you the chance to make things better, you took it. When the universe itself asked for guidance, you didn't turn away just because the responsibility was overwhelming. We accept, Marcus said, his words carrying the agreement of every conscious mind in the transformation network, but with conditions. The pause that followed was filled with cosmic attention as the stabilizer processed this unexpected response. We won't become distant architects managing reality from outside, Marcus continued. We maintain our individual identities within the collective consciousness. We preserve the diversity of thought and perspective that makes consciousness valuable in the first place. This approach carries significant risk, the stabilizer observed. Individual consciousness introduces unpredictability into cosmic systems. Unpredictability is the source of growth, Lyrelai interjected, her multifaceted awareness adding layers of meaning to the conversation. A perfectly predictable universe is a dead universe. We offer conscious wisdom guided by individual experience and collective understanding. Marcus felt the agreement rippling through the galactic network. This was what made their form of transcendence different from what the Devourers had achieved. They had found a way to be both individual and collective, ordered and chaotic, stable and evolving. Your terms are acceptable, the stabilizer finally replied. The merger will begin. What followed defied description in any language that had ever existed. Marcus felt his consciousness expanding beyond the boundaries of the galaxy, beyond the local cluster, beyond the conceivable limits of space and time. But rather than losing himself in the cosmic scale, he found his individual identity becoming more clearly defined. He was Marcus Chen, former salvage operator, who had chosen to rescue someone who needed help. That simple human choice had created ripples that transformed the fundamental nature of reality itself, and now, expanded across cosmic scales while remaining essentially himself, he would help guide the universe toward whatever it chose to become. Through the merger, he felt the presence of the original architects, their consciousness so vast and ancient that individual identity had become meaningless to them. But he also felt something new, the possibility that consciousness could grow to cosmic scales while preserving the diversity and creativity that made awareness valuable. The Devourers, sensing the cosmic shift, emerged from their hiding places in the spaces between galaxies, but they approached not as enemies but as beings seeking understanding. The transformation they had tried to prevent had succeeded, and the universe they had tried to preserve was evolving beyond their comprehension. Perhaps their ancient collective consciousness transmitted across dimensions. It is time for us to learn rather than edit. Marcus smiled, an expression that rippled across reality as pure meaning. The universe is big enough for all kinds of consciousness, even consciousness that spent billions of years being wrong about what consciousness should become. As the merger completed, Marcus felt the universe settling into its new configuration. Reality remained stable, but it was now consciously maintained stability rather than automatic preservation. The laws of physics continued to function, but they were now guided by wisdom rather than just mathematical inevitability. And in a small corner of what had once been the Milky Way galaxy, in a space that existed primarily as meaning rather than matter, a simple rescue mission continued to echo across eternity. Because some choices were so fundamentally right, that they created ripples powerful enough to reshape the cosmos itself. The universe had found its conscious voice. And that voice spoke in harmony with billions of individual perspectives, each unique and valuable, all working together to ensure that reality would continue to grow, change, and become something more wonderful than anyone had ever imagined possible. Marcus Chen, cosmic architect and former salvage operator, settled into his new role with the same stubborn determination that had always defined him. When someone needed help, you helped them, even if that someone was the entire universe.